the big news, I don't know why you've selected a Sky story here. It's interesting. Is the Fastly outage.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was actually Fastly's blog. I'm going to go there instead. They had a summary of the June 8 outage. So, do you know what it was that caused it? You up to speed with that?
No.
So, seemingly, it was a single customer made a valid change. Apparently, they're saying it was a valid change. They won't tell you which customer it is. So, this is the summary of what happened. So, on May the 12th, they did a deployment which introduced a bug, which could be triggered by specific customer configuration under specific circumstances. And on June 8, a customer actually made that change. And that caused 85% of the network to return errors. Because this is the thing, it's a Fastly outage, and it's billed as an outage, but it isn't actually an outage. Because if you saw what happened, it was actually forwarding you to a... well, at least giving you a varnish connection page, a varnish error, because Fastly is built upon the varnish caching system. So actually, it was kind of doing almost the right thing to a certain degree. It just wasn't actually giving you the information to actually display the web pages, which is interesting, I think, because actually the product did, to a degree, stay up.
Interesting. Well, all I got was like phone calls from clients saying my website's down. What's going on? Like, okay.
Yeah, well, it's seemingly, I mean, I noticed that I was working with an organization where you start seeing Slack things go across. It wasn't actually affecting us, it was affecting other sites. And so you start seeing notifications on Slack saying, hang on a minute, all these other things are going down. I think what was really interesting as well that people noticed was that Amazon was affected by this.
Yeah.
And Amazon have their own CDN.
Yeah.
And what it was, someone actually described it internally in the work chat as it was quite a comical effect, because what it did was it removed the CSS from Amazon. So all of the styling went a bit skew-if.
No one knows the difference.
Well, it's a little strange, isn't it, if you start seeing the styling go a bit skewy, because it has, obviously Amazon have CloudFront, don't they? And I think what they do is they use a mixture of... they have other things as backups. And so I think this is actually a case for not having a sole reliance on a single product, such as Fastly. You should actually have a fallback if something goes wrong. But then again, I don't know, from not having been in an organization that actually experienced this problem, it'd be good to see, to hear from someone who was in an organization that had this problem, how it was detected for them. How did it flare up? Because did it just reduce the number of customers that they were actually seeing to the site? Because it was a very interesting outage, like I said, where it wasn't like you had things forwarding to localhost. It was actually forwarding to the varnish cache error page.
Yeah. I'm just looking at the time. 8:47 a.m. Eventually fixed at 17:25. That's crazy. That's a long time.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? But within 49 minutes, they say they had 95% of the network operational.
Oh, good. Okay.
So they were able to actually restore that.
I'm a Cloudflare kind of gal. Is Fastly... does Fastly cost money? I mean, Cloudflare costs money, but...
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, it's... I'm pretty sure it does anyway. I'd be very surprised if it didn't. I mean, it's a CDN. It's a content delivery network. You know, they all have different ways of doing it, whether it's Fastly, Cloudflare. I can't think of any others off the top of my head.
CloudFront.
I had several. There's Akamai is another one, I believe. All right. CDNs. Other CDNs are available. Level 3, I think, do a CDN. God, I've worked with so many, and for some reason my mind's gone blank. But yeah, they all work in a similar sort of way. They have servers that are distributed around the globe, and they try and route you through to the nearest version that's holding a sort of cached version of that content. And they're used for different things, whether it's not necessarily always hosting the whole website. In Netflix's case, it'll be hosting movie files, something along those sort of lines. So, yeah, I mean, interesting.
Yeah.
It's sparked up a lot of debate.
What's the debate?
There was an interesting thing on Twitter that got forwarded internally about the blaming capitalism for the downfall, which I think felt like a little bit of a far stretch. But I think there is this sort of issue about whether you put your entire reliance in a company like Fastly, or whether you put reliance on more distributed open source type technology. But there isn't, as far as I know it, there's not really like an open... You're going to have to pay for hosting everywhere, aren't you? So someone has to... although you kind of... I think a lot of people imagine the internet as this sort of thing where, humans die off and the internet will just keep ticking over, which I think is true to a certain degree until all of the data centers fail, which could be long after human existence with some of the resiliency that some of them have. But... you've got to pay for something somewhere. I mean, that will probably be what happens if civilization was to disappear overnight, but all of the power stations and everything kept running for a period of time. I imagine people's subscriptions would fail before the data centers did.
You reckon?
I reckon. I mean, things would keep moving, wouldn't they? Direct debits would still go in and out of people's accounts.
I was going to say it would be until the accounts are depleted.
Yeah, well, or cards expire, or whatever it is.
Exactly. Yeah,
the world will keep moving to a certain degree. It would be really interesting to plot how that actually happened.
Yeah. Well, let's try and plan to be around after the apocalypse, and then we can
just to observe.
Yeah.
But I think that's it's interesting. I think it will spark more debate as well, and it's definitely more of a case for a multi-cloud solution in my view. And I generally think that you have a lot of tools, for example, with AWS, where if you were going to pick a database, you might go for DynamoDB or I think RDS as well from Amazon. But you are very much putting yourself in an Amazon bucket. In my opinion, you would probably be better choosing an open source technology like, say, Cassandra, and hosting that on any platform. So that if you had, or multiple platforms. So if, for example, you did have an Amazon outage, then you could move it over to Google, or you would actually maybe have that running in parallel. So that, one of them fails and you fall back. In the same way as years and years ago, we would have had, active data centers, potentially. One of the data centers goes down. I just think we kind of need to feel that same way with clouds as well. Now you kind of want to have an active cloud. And that's why you'd go for open source stuff, because then it can run exactly the same technology. It can run on both of those clouds.
Yeah. It's just the overhead, isn't it? Of that redundancy is like, half the internet went down probably with this Fastly outage. I'm sure there are a lot of money lost, but I also think that probably half of those people, maybe even more, 3/4 of those people probably didn't see much of an impact on their financial. Obviously the big companies, definitely more enterprise, will be looking at this kind of redundancy. But, mum and pop shop with their own little Webflow website, they're not going to be like, right, we need to factor in some redundancy if our site goes down for like a day,
No, I think that's true. I mean, I think it definitely depends on scale. And I think it also depends on the scale you're planning to achieve as well. Because if you're growing at a very, very fast rate, I would always choose open source software over sticking yourself, trying to stick yourself into the Google or the Azure or the AWS camp, because they've got great tools. And I think, again, you can choose those tools if you're just trying to spin something up really quickly, because actually some of them are really, really, really easy to use. In obviously a little bit more complicated than Webflow, but not that much more, if you know what you're doing. And so, I think it's only when you're trying to think about what that scale is going to be, how much traffic does your organization need to serve, that's where I'd probably design an open source solution that allowed you to deploy to multiple clouds at the same time. And then you really, as long as you've got a really good DevOps setup where you're actually able to spin the infrastructure up with, again, something open source like Terraform, you can control your infrastructure really quickly and control it really quickly. Then you'd use something like that to be able to move between or redeploy or move between platforms.
I didn't know Terraform is open source.
Well, yeah, I mean, the technology is open source. I think you can pay for the privilege of a Terraform subscription to manage everything in the cloud. But Terraform as the actual software is in the same way as like Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch has a paid for company arm. If you want to host your Elasticsearch instance on Elastic Cloud and as a managed instance, then you're free to do that. But then if you want to deploy it yourself, if you want to run it in Docker on your local computer, then you're free to do so.
More free CTO advice there from Chris, so you can have that one for free.